a video cast about psychology and self-help and how your brain works. My name is Faith. I'm the author of Know Your Brain, and I'm a psychoeducational consultant who mostly talks about the brain. And I'm very happy today to welcome Dr. Jack Naglieri, who is a retired university professor and the author of 55 Tests, and also the author of about 25 books, or the co-author. So, Dr. Naglieri, welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, so today I want to ask you, let's just jump right in. I want to ask you, can you please explain the PASS theory of cognition?
So the PASS theory of intelligence is a project that I've been working on with my colleague J.P. Das from the University of Alberta since 1984. We initially started the project with the vision that in order to reinvent how we measure intelligence, we needed to start with a theory. The theory should be based on brain function, and it should be easy and fast to use, and it should be supported by the science as a tool that really helps psychologists and school psychologists understand how our children learn, especially how a specific child learns, and any obstacles to that.
Yeah.
So we chose to build a new way of measuring intelligence called the cognitive assessment system based upon a theory from the beginning. That's the first time an intelligence test has ever been built from the beginning on a theory of intelligence.
So how were other intelligence tests, around what time period were other intelligence tests developed, and how did they develop them that was different?
In the early 1900s, Binet and Simon created their version, the Binet, of course. They actually created 3 versions. And when they were creating their final version, the 1911 version, they eliminated from the previous 1908 version test questions that demanded knowledge. And they explicitly write that all the verbal knowledge questions would provide an advantage to people who had opportunity to learn, basically.
Yes.
Then, when Binet passed in 1912, Terman came along. Terman created, of course, the Stanford Binet from Stanford University, and he put into that version a whole bunch of verbal stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That really created a problem in terms of fair assessment from the beginning.
Yeah.
Now, Terman had a student, Arthur Otis. Arthur Otis was one of the key people who helped to create the Army Alpha and the Army Beta tests that were used in World War I to identify people for officer training. There was a military examiner who was stationed in Fort Logan, Texas, and that person really liked the Army Alpha and the Army Beta so much that he relied on that when he created the Wechsler Bellevue scales.
Okay. And is that sort of the grandfather of the WISC that so many people now use?
Wechsler, you mean Wechsler?
Yes.
You know, he just he didn't really create these. he really borrowed them
Okay.
from the and if you go to Google Books, you can look up Army mental tests, Yoakum and Yerkes, and when you open it up, you're going to see the Wechsler scales.
Yeah.
Now, so what JP Das and I did is, of course, completely different. We said we know what the WISC is, we know what the Binet is like, we know what all the other tests are like. We're not going to use them as a model. Our model, our vision was to measure 4 abilities described by Luria in so many of his amazing books and articles and such. So, what does that mean? We measure attention. That's Luria's first functional unit. Attention, of course, is critical. If you don't have attention, you don't have anything.
And so for people who don't know, can you just say who Alexander Luria is or
Oh,
was?
sure. So A.R. Luria was an amazing researcher, neuropsychologist in Moscow, and he worked a lot with men who had injuries, brain injuries because of wars and stuff like that. And that allowed him to start to understand how the brain is
Yeah.
organized.
And I think it's important for people to understand when some intelligence tests that we're still using were developed, people didn't know very much about the anatomy of the brain or what the different parts did. So they designed the tests based on what they did know or what they could do. But then you're using more updated information from Luria about what the different parts of the brain actually do.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's
Can you
correct.
talk about each of the letters in PASS, PASS, and what those are?
Yeah, yeah, happy to do that. So PASS, planning. Planning is an ability that we have related to the front part of the brain. So right away, that lets you know what we're really talking about. We could call it executive function or metacognition or a lot of different terms, but it's all about when you have to figure out how to do something. And of course, this is especially important whenever you're in a novel situation. You don't know much to be able to solve the problem, so you have to figure out how to do it. And the how might be ask for help. The how might be look it up, ask AI
Yeah.
how to do it. I mean, and on, right? There's
Yeah.
a lot of possibilities.
So
That's
I think,
planning.
yeah, I think what Luria found was that soldiers who had damage to that part of their brain weren't able to deal with novel situations and develop a strategy.
Right.
So,
Right.
so you're,
Yes. Just
yeah,
like Phineas Gage, right? Remember Phineas, the famous case of
yes,
Phineas. Uh,
okay,
Very capable before the accident, not capable after. Uh,
right, because he lost his executive functioning skills.
yeah. Well, but by the way, I don't think it makes sense to talk about executive function skills
Okay,
because my definition of a skill is something we do almost effortlessly because it's so well learned, we can just do it very fluently.
okay.
And because planning or executive function is about thinking about how you're doing. So those things can't come together. If you're doing something fluently, you're not thinking. So that means you're not using EF.
There's a,
If you're
the
using
problem is,
EF, that
yeah,
means you're not doing it fluently.
there's a
Uh,
lot of books called Teaching Executive Functioning Skills. So,
yeah, I
so
know.
you have a problem with the title? Like, well, how would you title
Absolutely.
those? How
The
would you
whole
title those
concept.
books?
The whole concept I have a problem with. I think it's not about teaching kids a specific skill. So I've done a lot of research on this. I've published a whole line of articles that illustrate that when you don't explicitly teach, instead, when you ask questions like, what did you do? to solve this problem? What else did you do? What else could you have done? When you tried that, how did it work? What will you do next time? Those questions actually help children better utilize
Okay.
planning. If you tell them, here's a specific strategy, remember it, they won't remember it.
So
And if
would
you
you
give them
call
a
it instead of,
cutesy little
yeah,
acronym, to follow,
yeah,
they're not going to remember that either.
like COPS for written expression,
Well,
COPS, that's one of the acronyms. So instead of saying teaching executive functioning skills, would you say fostering executive functioning abilities? Is that like a better way to phrase it?
I would say fostering.
Because instead of teaching, you're kind of bringing something out of them that's already there
Yeah,
through
that's right.
questioning.
Right. But it's
Yeah.
not abilities plural. It's this
Okay.
one ability related to the front part of the brain
Okay.
that's that's in its simplest terms is defined as
Yeah.
how you do what you decide to do.
One thing I've noticed in the executive functioning literature is some of them break it down into so many categories. It's
Yeah.
overwhelming. They'll have like, some of them will have five or something, and I find that okay, but some of them will have like 30. So that you're supposed to teach this kid 30 like different skills. It seems a bit overwhelming to me. And
Not
you're,
only
yeah,
that, it's not consistent with the science.
yeah,
So, you may know that I have two executive function rating scales, the CEFI and for kids and the CEFI for adults.
yeah.
So one of the things I love about being a test author is when I publish a test like the CEFI, have thousands of cases of data. And those thousands of cases of data I use to ask the question, is it executive functions or executive functions singular? And the answer from the CEFI and the CEFI adult, involving close to 10,000 ratings, tells us very clearly that executive function, as it relates to these behaviors, is unitary. It's one factor, not multiple factors, only
Mhm.
one. So all the little parts that people talk about, that's just stuff that, creative and smart people make up. But the science doesn't support it.
If you were to define executive functioning in one or two sentences, what would your definition be?
How you do what you decide to do.
How you do what you decide to do. Would you call that strategy?
Well,
What?
strategies would be things that you might use if you're thinking about how to do something. You might have a strategy. You might develop a strategy just for that particular task.
Okay. All right.
So that's the P.
That's good for P. Let's do A.
So
Attention.
A,
Tell me
A
about the
is
attention and pass.
A is all about focus and resistance to distraction. So, of course, if A is down, you can't plan. You can't do much of anything else. So A could be down because you're sleeping or you're totally fatigued or you're inebriated or whatever the case may be.
Hungry, hungry.
All kinds of reasons, right? So that comes first, really. And that's really Luria's first functional unit is the attention. So
Yeah,
it's focus and resisting distraction. So we measure it by providing a stimulus that has two dimensions and and we ask the child to respond to the dimension that's less salient than the other. And that's what
right.
makes it hard.
Yes. And I've administered that. So what I found really interesting about your research was you found that children with um, a reading disability had trouble with sequential reasoning. Children with autism had trouble with um, attention, so
Attention,
avoiding
shifting attention,
yeah.
especially.
Okay, and children with ADHD had trouble with planning. And I
Correct.
don't know, that just I don't know, set off a little fireworks in my brain. That was so fascinating to me. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, let's finish the other
Okay,
descriptions, because we only got
sure.
half through PASS,
Okay. Do you want to say
right?
anything else about attention, or do you want to
Um,
move on to sequential?
no, I think the tension is clear.
Yeah.
So simultaneous, what does that mean? And successive, what does that mean? So in 1979, J.P. Das, John Kirby, and Ron Jarman, all Canadians, by the way, happy to hear that.
Yes.
They published a book, Simultaneous and Successive Cognitive Processing. So what they did is they just looked at half of Luria and they described what these abilities are. So simultaneous processing, simultaneous kind of interesting terminology. I think it probably there's some translation from Russian to English, and that must have been difficult for them to make. But when we talk about simultaneous, what we're talking about is when we have information all there, everything's there, and what we have to do is see how it goes together.
Right.
In contrast, successive processing is all about information that's in order. So if you ask me my phone number, I would tell you my phone number. But of course, in phone numbers, we chunk them to make it easier. That's a
Right.
strategy for remembering a long list of numbers. But just the sequencing part. Now, think about reading decoding when kids are taught to blend the sounds and all that kind of stuff. That demands a lot of successive processing. Think about reading comprehension. So you're reading a paragraph or a couple of paragraphs, and the teacher says, "What's the theme of this?" Well, in order to figure out the theme, you have to understand all the parts, how they go together,
Yeah. Look
right?
at it more broadly. Yeah.
Yeah, to step back and say, "Oh, here's blah blah." So that's PASS. So how does this relate to different kinds of disabilities? Well, if you have a child with dyslexia and they can't work with information in order, they do poorly on phonological tests. The phonological test doesn't measure what's wrong. It's just a symptom. And that is that the kids can't work in order. So the profiles that we get on the CAS are super low on the successor processing scale. Now, if you have a different kind of dyslexia that are orthographic, then we get low score on simultaneous scale, by the way.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know
Yeah,
that. I'm writing it down.
yeah. And then, of course, for ADHD kids, what do we think about them? Is they're out of control? They really have. We like to talk. Like Russell Barkley talks about executive function. To say that, I mean, that's really true. We just call it planning, and that's what we get when we study kids with ADHD. Hyperactive impulsive type, low planning, inattentive type, low attention.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
so if you look on my website and you look at the images that I've created where we look at profiles for all the different intelligence tests, the CAS is the only test that yields distinctive profiles like I just described. The WISC, the WJ, the KBC, the RIAS, none of those tests out there have distinctive profiles like we do. Why does that happen? Because the 4 scales on the CAS have enough specific variance that, number one, they can be interpreted, and number two, that they're really tapping into something that really matters. If you look at the bifactor analytic research, all the other tests out there, all of them basically fail the bifactor analysis, meaning the only score that should be interpreted on a WISC, for example, is the full scale. And the parts, the subtests, no matter who tells you, what they tell you, what book it's in, what program that will mix and match and put this and that, the other thing together, it's all error variance. The only thing you should use on those tests is the full scale. And of course, that doesn't tell us much.
It doesn't give a lot of detail about their profile, well, any detail about their
Doesn't give you
profile.
any detail. That's why the CAS
Yeah.
is so unique. That's why the CAS is so successful at uncovering the hidden weaknesses, because we have a field that's constrained by its history.
Yes. So I will
That's
just say
a
that,
long
yeah,
answer to your question, by the way.
yeah. In my job, I'm trying to use the CAS more and more, and it's been my experience that it brings a different lens and some new information and a really exciting way to gather additional information about students and areas we weren't really looking at as much. We weren't really testing attention very often or planning, so it's really exciting to be able to better help kids with the CAS. So can you talk about the test that uses the PAS theory of intelligence to to can you talk about the CAS too?
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
The CAS-2 was built like as an extension of the CAS, the first edition, on basically on 12 subtests. So we have 3 in each of the 4 areas. You can give the basic battery, which would be 2 of each of the 4 areas. So yeah, there's flexibility built right into it.
Mm.
I understand that time, is limited, and if you're going to just use the 4 subtests in about 45 minutes, you're done. That's perfectly fine. It has good validity.
Yeah.
You don't really lose that much. The only thing that you get if you do the 12 is a little bit more information. But personally, I think I like the 8 subtests the best. And in fact, the digital version of the CAS, which we're looking at in early 2026 coming up here, is 8 subtests.
Oh,
This
wonderful.
the subtests are easy to give. I wrote the entire test, all the instructions, all the items, everything. From my perspective as a school psychologist, when I'd be giving tests and I'd complain, this damn test is so hard to give, or why is it taking me hours and hours just to learn how to do this? Does it have to be that hard? Does it have to be this difficult? No, it
Yeah.
doesn't. And these record forms, why can't the record form be easier? And how can we streamline the scoring and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff?
What ends up
I
happening when something's very difficult to administer or to score is people won't choose that test very often, right? Um, I just want to show this book. This is one of your books. It's Essentials of CAS2 Assessment. I've got some post-it notes in here because I have been using it. I just want people to know that if they're administering the CAS2, this is probably an essential book to buy because it gives you information about the essentials of the test.
and
So,
I would just note that it's with Tulio Otero.
Tulio Otero, your
Yeah,
co-writer.
Tulio and I work together very closely, and I would say he's probably he and I are together on our understanding of PAS and how it's rendered in the CAS,
Yeah.
and he's as much of an expert in it as I am.
Okay, we don't have much time left, so I just wanted to talk about 2 more things. I just want to
Okay.
say, I think the finding on autism is very significant because I mean there are so many more and more diagnoses of autism for the first thing. And there's so many children in our schools with autism who are needing service. I'd say about 60% of the clients I see directly do have autism. And it's really a problem that the school system and society has to deal with is these increased numbers of diagnosed children. So the finding that attention is perhaps the basic cognitive process that is different with autism is very significant because different conceptualizations aren't saying that. They're saying it's theory of mind, or they're saying it's an emotional difference, or they're saying it's a difference um, in something else, right? And it's important to get it right. So if it is indeed attention, or if you just look at it through a past lens, it's one of 4 things, right? It's either planning, attention, uh,
Simultaneous
simultaneous
or successive, yeah.
or successive. It's one of those, right? Because that's what there is. So to say that it's attention, I think that could be very helpful for understanding people with autism and planning interventions and treatments for it.
And let me
Um,
clarify, it's
yeah.
not that they can't attend,
Okay.
it's that they can't shift.
Okay. So does that,
Shifting attention is part of the attention paradigm.
okay. So once
Both
they've
go together.
focused on something, they can't move off to another thing. Is
Yeah,
that,
you think about a lot of autistic people, they'll just be, laser focused on one thing,
yeah.
and they can't
And
shift.
then
And you want to know,
when you try to transition them, they can have a big emotional outburst because you're
right,
asking them to shift or
right,
forcing them to shift.
and it's too hard for them.
And it's too hard or too emotional or something. Yeah. So I think I've seen very little online about attention and autism. I did send you one video, but people don't talk about it a lot. How it's related to the disorder, to the I don't want to call it a disorder, to the difference, to the neuro difference. So the last thing I want to talk about, because we're running out of time, is helping children learn, this book. So can you talk a little bit about this book, which you wrote with Eric Pickering?
Yeah, and Tulio did the translations into Spanish. Tulio and Mary Marino. Yeah. If you understand why a student struggles, and if you understand the child's strengths, because as you know, we always use a triangle to represent the scores that we get from the CAS and achievement. You should be able to then make better decisions about how to help a child perform. I'm going to give you one example from Tulio. So Tulio calls me up one day and says, Jack, I got this kid and he is really struggling at school, reading especially. And I tested him and his attention score is very, very low. So Tulio says, so I went to the Helping Children Learn book and I went to this section that is the handout for kids who have problem with attention. And there's a little cartoon kind of, and it says, think smart, look at the details. In other words, that's how you pay attention, right? By
Yeah.
looking at details. So he cuts it out, scotch tapes it to the kid's desk. A couple of weeks later, the teacher gets in touch with Tulio. What did you do? He's reading 80% accuracy. He was like 20% accuracy before. What did you do? What did Tulio do? He found out what the problem was.
Yeah.
He helped the child understand the nature of the problem. And by getting the child to slow down and pay more attention to the task, the child improved.
So the first thing was pinpointing the area of difficulty. That's essential.
Yeah,
And that's what psychoeducational assessments try to do, but you got to have the right tests, right?
right.
And I just want to say, I have any cognitive test I've ever seen or administered or learned about, this is the only one that seems to have a resource of interventions linked to it. Like, I don't want to call anybody out any particular test, but they don't have a resource like this where they have a book of handouts for teachers that they can go to, like something so practical. So thank you for this book. This is my favorite book.
Good. Yeah, it's mine too. And it's just a lot of fun to be able to go through there and get ideas and then work with the teachers. And by the way, teachers and parents and the students themselves should be informed about the past scores. It'll make a difference.
Yeah. I think one thing we sometimes leave out is we don't always inform the students.
And we should.
So that's something we're going to talk about in my department is reporting to the children, right? So
Yeah.
giving them feedback. I mean, sometimes we do, but we sometimes leave it to the parent, which maybe isn't arguably not the best thing. Okay, so I think I'm done with my questions. Is there anything you want to say before we go?
I want to thank you for being brave enough to go to a place that's new and to do it with the clarity and effort as you have, I think that's very commendable. A lot of people, for a lot of people, it's easier to just stay where they are.
People like routine.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I've always been a person who likes novelty a little bit more than routine, which hasn't always worked for me, but I love this book. I found this book. I told you when I was cleaning out someone's desk and one of the psychology staff who left, and I read it and I thought it was so novel and refreshing and logical. And I just, yeah, so I've really become a big advocate of it. So
Oh,
thank
that's
you.
terrific. Appreciate it.
Okay. Okay. So I'm gonna say goodbye and I'm gonna stop recording. So
All right.
thank you for being my guest today. And if anybody liked the content and you want more content like this, please remember to subscribe, like, and comment. And I have so few followers that I actually answer the comments. So please subscribe to my channel.
And I would encourage people to go to my website, jacknaglieri.com, as well as my website for my work in the gifted area, naglierigifted.com.
And you can buy all of his books on Amazon.
Yes.
And I guess I'll close. This is going to be my closing statement. Know your brain for a bountiful life. That's my catchphrase.